Starting a new series. It's called Rerouting, where we're trying to find grace in our mistakes. Because if you travel or if you live life, you've probably taken a wrong turn. You've taken a wrong turn at some time. Life is full of wrong turns for all of us, maybe some more than others, but some of them feel like kind of small mistakes. They don't feel that big. Others, they feel much, much larger. Right? There's times where you take a wrong turn and you're like, oh man, I'm really in trouble now. We were going on a family vacation this summer and it was a beautiful day and Amy and I are talking and we're enjoying the time and I'm not really paying attention to the GPS and I get on the ramp and I'm like, is this right? This is right, isn't it? And we're going, and all of a sudden I see the GPS bump up like 25 minutes on the estimated time because I had gone north instead of south. And on a highway, then you got to go all the way to the exit and get off. And listen, I won't tell you whether or not I turned around in a U-turn thing. I will just tell you it would have been really hard to eat that 25 minutes, right? I was so frustrated with myself as soon as I realized I made that wrong turn, right? And the GPS starts like rerouting, right? And let me see how much time it takes now. There's a feeling in your stomach, whether it's a literal wrong turn, if it's a metaphorical wrong turn, if it's a moral wrong turn. When you realize it, it's an awful feeling. And in this series, we're going to talk about the times in life where we take a wrong turn. Sometimes we wander into it, right? We're not paying attention, and we just kind of wander into the wrong turn. Other times, we deliberately walk into it, if we can be honest. And the Maps app, it has to do some work. It's got to start rerouting you based on where you are now, given the consequences of that turn, right? You can't go back and undo that. You have to say from where we are right now, if this is where we're heading, how do we refigure it, how to get there? And we're going to do all that through the book of Jonah. Jonah's a small book. It's just 4 chapters. It's tucked away in the minor prophets section of the Old Testament in between Obadiah and Micah. And Jonah is a prophet himself. He becomes known as the reluctant prophet. And if you're not familiar with his story, you will find out quickly how he earned that nickname. And it will become clear because God speaks to Jonah and Jonah doesn't listen. Not only does he not listen in a passive kind of way of like God speaks and Jonah's like, oh, I didn't hear that. No, he doesn't listen in an actively disobedient way. God says to do this and he goes the exact opposite way. And so through this first chapter of Jonah, I want to look at the anatomy of a mistake. Right? What happens? How do we do this? What are the things that go through in the process when we're making a bad choice, when we're choosing sin, when we're choosing to go in the wrong direction? What happens and what can we learn from the life of Jonah? Now, we're just going to stay in the first chapter of Jonah today. This is a 4-week series, and there's 4 chapters in the book. So if you're good at math, you can figure out how we're going to approach this. And I want to look at the things that led him off course. I think ultimately we will see, unfortunately, some of ourselves in Jonah and in his choices and in his actions. For some of you, you may look at this and you may see your past self. You may be like, oh yeah, that I do. That's me, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. Others of you, it will line up with choices and decisions that you're making in your life right now. But what we'll find both in this particular chapter and throughout the book of Jonah is that at times it can feel like we will never overcome our mistakes, but God's grace is greater. Because I'm a sinner and you're a sinner. And the Bible tells us every one of us, we've gone astray. We've all gone off course. And for a lot of us here today, we've been in a place where it felt like we went so far off course that we're never going to be able to get back to the right path again. We feel like we've messed up to a degree that God himself can't redeem us, or he can't redeem this, that he could never bring us back to a place of being healthy and whole and good again. But what I've found, and what a lot of you have found, is that as profound as our sin, as our mistakes, as our ability to go off course may be, God's grace is greater. It's always greater. And that's for all of us. Yes, there's a person here that's like, yeah, that's true for 99% of the people here today, but not for me. No, it is true for you too. Even for you, God's grace is greater. So let's get into this account. It's Jonah chapter 1. We're going to do the whole chapter. We'll start at verse 1. It says, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, son of Amittai. Go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Just know I will hate every time I have to say Tarshish as much as you will. Jonah, he's a prophet. And God speaks to prophets and speaks through prophets, and so that's what God does here. Now, there is a son of Jonah, son of Amittai, that's mentioned in 2 Kings 14, which means Jeroboam the second was the king during that time. So if we line it up and say, well, Jonah, who is a prophet in the northern kingdom of Israel, son of Amittai, probably the same guy. That means that this takes place between 785 and 740 BC. Just to kind of give you a date range, that's the reign of Jeroboam II. And God gives Jonah a mission, and he gives him a message. He gives him a place to go. He said, go to Nineveh. But he gives them something to say too. Tell them, I've got some bad news for them. They're incredibly wicked, and something needs to be done about this city. Now, Nineveh is the capital of the Assyrian Empire at that time. Historians would tell you Nineveh was one of the most foremost cities in the world in that era. So it's an intimidating assignment for anyone to get. It's an intimidating assignment for Jonah. But there's more at work than it just being a big, scary assignment. It's more than God saying, hey, go to New York City, right, to minister to people. You're like, whoa, that's a big place. There's more at work here because the Assyrians are not great people. You can read in Nahum chapter 3 if you want to read about their tactics, but they're vicious and they're cruel. I mean, really, they were terrorists long before the term existed. And at this time, those people, the Assyrian people, the people from Nineveh, they're becoming a bigger and bigger threat to the people of Israel. In just a few years, 722 BC, Assyria will overthrow Israel. It'll be known as the Assyrian captivity or the Assyrian exile, and the people of Israel will be forced to leave their country through mass deportation and resettlement. So the people that God is saying, go and share my love with, right? Tell them, give them this message. They are a real and present danger to Jonah and to his people and to his nation. But that's who God says you're called to preach to. Go warn them about my coming wrath. And that's why when Jonah receives these really clear and direct instructions from God, he not only doesn't do what God says, he goes in the opposite direction. He heads to Tarshish, which at the time is known as the end of the earth. Now, you have to understand, this is back at a time when people thought the earth was flat. Now, certainly no one thinks that now, but they thought it was flat and that Tarshish was way out on the edge. And I should be the last person to tell you not to get on a ship and try to sail to the ends of the earth. That is my favorite kind of vacation. But Jonah's not going on a vacation here. He is going to not just try to metaphorically flee from the Lord. He's trying to get as far away as he knows how to go. Jonah makes up his mind that this is what he's going to do instead of listening to God and instead of following his plan. And so he pays the fare, right? He probably thinks he's done paying for this little excursion, but he has no idea how much this is going to cost him as this story unfolds. And I love the verse 3, it says that he sets sail to flee from the Lord. If only he could have read the Psalms, if only he knew David, because David wrote in Psalm 139, verses 7 and 8, where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. David would have said, listen, Jonah, if you go to Tarshish, God is there. He lived a few hundred years before Jonah, but if they could have crossed paths, he would have said, hey, listen, you're wasting your time, man. There's nowhere that you can go where you're away from God, even Tarshish. And what happened in the life of Jonah and in the life of David and what happens in our own lives is we see that when we go away from God and what he's commanded, it is always the beginning of a mistake. It's always, whatever hoops you're trying to jump through to justify your sin, however you're trying to justify not listening to God, to make yourself feel better about ignoring his word and his wisdom, it is always a mistake. No matter how much you can rationalize it, if God says go here and you go there, it is the beginning of a bad chapter of your life. If God says love these people and you hate these people, you've gone off course. If God says stay far away from this and you dive into it, you have messed up. But that's what Jonah did. And this is how God responds in verse 4. The Lord sent a great wind on the sea and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. God, who controls the wind and the waves and the sea, he sends a storm to let Jonah know, hey, you haven't escaped my presence quite yet. Because as I've seen too many times, as you may have seen as well, when we are going off course, God will do what it takes to get our attention. He will. He'll do what it takes. I have this conversation regularly, and people will say, hey, can you pray for my brother, or my sister, or my friend, my aunt? They've gone off course, right? And they're not living how they should be, and we want God to bring them back. And I want that. I'm always willing to pray for that, and I know that God can absolutely do that. But I also feel like I need to give you a warning or a disclaimer when you ask that, because I said, listen, we can pray for that, but God's going to do what it takes to get their attention. Right? Quite often it's something incredibly painful that God uses to get our attention when we go off course. It's the arrest that's in the paper that everyone sees. It's getting fired from a job because you didn't show up. Addicts know it as our rock bottom moment. And rock bottom is never fun, but it is effective. Do you see that? I don't know her name, but with the home run derby this week, there was a singer, and she came out and she sang the national anthem, and it was so bad, right? People are like, who is this? What happened? She's a Grammy-nominated artist. And then she came out and said, I was drunk, right? Her rock bottom moment was on TV in front of a bunch of people, and she went to rehab. That's not a fun way to do it, but it is effective. And we're going off course. God will do what it takes to get our attention, and that's what happens here with Jonah. Verses 5 and 6, the narrative continues. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to his own God. And they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah had gone below deck, where he lay down and fell into a deep sleep. The captain went to him and said, how can you sleep? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish. The ship's in trouble. And the sailors and the others on the ship, they're terrified. They're crying out to their different gods. They're hoping that works. They start throwing stuff overboard, trying to make the ship lighter and more agile so it can survive the storm. I mean, they are in a full-scale panic. But what about the guy who's actually responsible for this mess? He's having a great nap, right? The waves are rocking back and forth, and the storm, it's like the original white noise machine, right? And he's just down there, and he's having a great time. And the captain finds him, and he's like, bro, are you serious right now? Right? You're asleep? We're all about to die. Aren't you a man of God? Get up and pray to your God, and maybe he will save us and we won't all die. The picture of the chaos on top of that ship, everyone fighting for their lives up there while Jonah is neck deep in a nap below deck. It just reminds us that frequently the problems we cause with our mistakes will be visible to the people around us before they are visible to us. I need you to hear that, right? Because some of you got people that love you and they care about you and they see how you're going off course and they're trying to help you with that, and you don't want to hear it. The degree to which some of you know this is heartbreaking. You watch someone, a child, a niece or a nephew, a sibling, you watched them go way off course, and you knew it long before they seemed to know it. You sensed the danger, you saw the outcome, you saw where it was heading, and they're just out there having a great time. And it's absolutely devastating to watch. You told your friend, you should stay away from this particular guy, and she didn't listen. You told your kids you shouldn't move in with your boyfriend or your girlfriend before they're married, and they said you're old and you're out of touch. You warned a coworker, hey, if you keep showing up drunk, they are actually going to fire you, and they called you a Bible thumper. And the consequences, they were clear to you before they were clear to them. And so all you could do is sit back and watch and pray. On the ship this day, everyone but Jonah knew how much of a mess they were in. The problems he was causing with his mistakes were visible to the people around him before they were visible to him. Verses 7 and 8. Then the sailors said to each other, come, let us cast lots to find out who's responsible for this calamity. They cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, tell us, who is responsible for making all this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? Now, we don't know what it is about this storm that causes the sailors to realize that it's more than just a regular old storm, right? There's some spiritual aspect going on here. Somebody is responsible for it. Maybe the storm was just that bad. Maybe God gave them some insight. But however it happened, they knew there was more than meets the eye behind all of this, and that someone was responsible. So they decided to cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. Now, casting lots, it could have been as simple as like drawing straws. You know, they've got a bunch of sticks, and one's a different length, and see who gets that. It could be like flipping coins, right, with some kind of flat stone or something like dice. We don't know the exact method. Probably the closest thing we have right now is flipping a coin and just seeing where it goes. And I'm not saying that we should bring this back. I'm just saying there are multiple times in the Bible where God uses this kind of thing to speak through and to tell people. I justified that for a while. In college, I had a job at the church right next door. So I would be in my office and it'd be time for class and be like, man, you know what I don't want to do right now is go to class. And so I would flip a coin. And I remember saying, God's got control of the coin, right? So if it was a head, I would head to class, and if it was a tail, I would keep my tail in the chair. And I did that a decent amount. I would encourage you to have a better system of decision making than I had at 20. But that was like, right? I'm like, well, if God's in control of this coin, don't do that. But they did do it at this time. And so it's this game of chance, right? The game of chance. God, you decide and tell us who's responsible for the mess that we're in. And I would pay money to see Jonah's face during all of this. I mean, he knows that his God is the one true God, the all-powerful God, and the rest of the guys are out here praying to nothing. And so he's probably thinking like, all right, game of chance. What are the odds that it's actually going to fall to me? Shoot, right? It did, right? He's got to have this moment of like, oh man. And now the rest of the ship knows that it's him. They know he's at fault, and they've got some questions. They want information from their sailing companion, and they want it now. Who are you? What kind of work do you do? Where are you from? Who are your people? And in verse 9, Jonah answered, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven who made the sea and the dry land. Jonah's answer is great. I don't know that it made the sailors feel any better, but he said, I worship the one true God. You know, the God who's powerful enough to calm the seas, the God who's powerful enough to make them go crazy and split a boat in half. That God, the real God, that's who I'm with. Because despite his present choices, Jonah does know God. Jonah is a man of God. And just like Jonah, we can have enough wisdom to know who God really is, but not enough wisdom to obey him. People are here every weekend and they're straddling this line. They're trying to. You know who God really is. You come to church. You listen to messages. You might even sing some songs about how great and powerful and mighty he is. But you're not willing to obey him. You're not willing to do what he asks you to do. You're certainly not willing to sacrifice anything for him. Because we can have enough wisdom to know who God really is, but not enough wisdom to actually obey him. Jonah did in this chapter. And the fact that he's with the real, true God is actually terrifying for his fellow travelers, the people who actually had a valid reason to sail to Tarshish. Verse 10 says this terrified them. And they asked, what have you done? They knew he was running away from the Lord because he had already told them so. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, what should we do to make the sea calm down for us? What should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? Jonah said, pick me up and throw me into the sea, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. They're like, okay, it's you. The storm is your fault. What do we need to do to make it stop? And Jonah, rightfully so, I respect this. He just kind of wears it, right? He wears it. He's like, this is my mess. I put you in all this, so just get rid of me and it will be over. It's my fault. Toss me into the seas and they will calm down. I've gone off course. God did this to get my attention, eliminate me from the equation, and it will be over. Because when we begin to fully realize the impact of our mistakes, guilt will surface. Before Jonah's asleep, he's got no idea. Everyone else knows they're in a mess, but now he knows they're in a mess and it's his fault. I've had these moments. You probably have as well. I still remember some real clear moments of seeing how my excessive drinking was impacting Amy. And the guilt and the heartbreak associated with that, if I think about it, it still makes me want to cry to this day. Just feeling absolutely awful when you get to the point, when you have the clarity of vision to see how your mistakes, how your choices, how your sin is impacting other people. It's a terrible feeling. And if you've been there, you know. And that's where Jonah is at this moment. That's what he's feeling. But the sailors, they don't want to just kill the guy, right? They don't want this on their consciences, especially if he's actually a prophet of the one true God. They don't want to just toss him into the sea. So to their defense, they tried to do something else. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not. For the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, please, Lord, Do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, Lord, have done as you pleased." Then they took Jonah and they threw him overboard, and the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and they made vows to him. They tried their best, right? They tried their best to not throw him overboard. I mean, if I was on the ship and there's this crazy storm and we're all going to die and Jonah says, "Hey, throw me over and it'll be done," I'd be like, "I'm getting a leg. Like, who else? Come on, let's go. Let's get this guy in, right? Get him in quickly." I would have been the first one to do it, but the men, they tried not to have to do that. I do love how they just kind of remind the Lord. They put this back on him. They're like, "Hey, we're about to kill a guy, but it's your fault, God. We want that clear before we do it. Maybe sign the terms and conditions," because eventually it became apparent that they had no choice. And at a certain point, the people around you have to let you face the consequences of your choices. Parents and grandparents and friends who've walked difficult roads with people that you love, you've tried to protect them. You tried to shield them from the consequences of their choices, of their sins, of their wrong turns and mistakes. But at a certain point, you have to let people face the consequences of their choices. And that's what happened with Jonah and with the sailors, right? They couldn't try to shield him anymore. They're going to die in those attempts. And so they did what he told them to do. They did what they had to do, and they threw him overboard. And what happens with that raging sea? It grows calm. Now, it doesn't say expressly in the verse that it happened immediately, but it definitely feels like that's how it went down, because the men immediately feared Jonah's God. Right? They feared the God that could do this, that could make the raging sea go crazy and then make it calm again in a moment. And they made some vows to him. Probably the same kind of vows that people make during a turbulent flight, or the kind of things that you promise during a Bills game, right? Like, "God, if he makes this field goal, I will become a missionary and I will never miss church again," right? And then he misses. Okay. And Jonah hits the Mediterranean Sea, and he goes below the surface of the water, and the water suddenly becomes calm. But below the surface, God is still at work. Look at verse 17. "Now the Lord provided a huge fish to swallow Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days and 3 nights. Now we don't know what kind of fish it was, just that God provided it at the exact time and the exact place that Jonah needed it. Because even when we are rebellious and we're resistant to God, he still sees us and he provides for us. Even though Jonah chose not to listen to God or to do what he commanded, even though Jonah tried to run as far away from God as he thought he could get, even though Jonah's living in rebellion at the moment, God still sees him and he still provides what he needs at the moment. And why is that? Why would God do that? Well, there's only one answer that makes sense. Because he's not done with Jonah yet. This is just chapter 1. His story is not done. And if you're here today and this is the kind of message that's hitting you between the eyes, the good news is that God has not forgotten you and God is not done with you yet. He's not given up on you. And in fact, I would say from firsthand and secondhand experience that if you're far off course right now, that he will bring you back to him if you'll let him. But he'll also, too, use this exact season of your life to inspire and encourage others in the future. No matter where you are today, no matter what condition you came in here in, God's grace is still greater than your sins. God's grace is greater than how far off course you feel like you've gone, and God is not finished with you yet. And God will take the most painful, lost, and broken chapters of your life, and he will write the best and most powerful testimony with these broken moments right now. I've seen him do it. I've seen him do it not only in my own life, but in some of yours. And what I deeply desire for us as a church and for the people here is for us to see God do exactly that again and again and again. Let's pray. God, I thank you. I thank you for your grace. God, I thank you for your love. I thank you that our story is not done. God, I believe that there are people here who came in today feeling like I've messed up enough that it can't be redeemed. I'm far enough off path that God couldn't bring me back, or even if he could, he wouldn't want to bring me back. God, I pray through the power of the truth of your word that you will remind each and every one of us that that is never true, that your grace is greater. That God, you not only want us to come back, the story of the prodigal son tells us that you are waiting for us, and when we're still a long way off, you'll run to us to bring us back. So God, I thank you for that powerful grace and for that love. God, I thank you for the truth that you are not done with us, that our story is not finished. And God, I pray every one of us would know that to the core of our being this morning. For your glory, in Jesus' name, amen.